The morning sun cast long shadows across the manicured gardens of Clarence's house as Charles stood at his study window, watching Kate Middleton walk slowly along the gravel path. Her shoulders were slumped, and, even from this distance, he could see the weight of recent events pressing down on her slender frame. The newspapers scattered across his mahogany desk told the story that had been dominating headlines for weeks, a relentless campaign of criticism that seemed designed to break the young woman who had captured his son William's heart. Charles had witnessed many storms throughout his decades in the public eye, but watching Kate endure this particular onslaught stirred something protective within him that surprised even himself. The media had been merciless, dissecting every aspect of her background, her family's business dealings, and what they perceived as her lack of immediate royal polish. Headlines screamed about her being unsuitable and common, words that made Charles's jaw clench with barely contained anger. As Kate disappeared around the corner toward the rose garden, Charles turned back to his desk, where the latest batch of newspaper clippings awaited his review. His private secretary had arranged them in neat piles, each more damaging than the last. The Daily Express had run a particularly vicious piece questioning whether Kate had the breeding necessary for royal life. The Mirror had published unflattering photographs taken with long-range lenses, capturing her in moments of exhaustion and stress. Even the supposedly respectable Times had joined the chorus, running an editorial that questioned the wisdom of William's choice. The door to his study opened without ceremony, and Camilla swept in wearing a silk dressing gown, her hair still tousled from sleep. She moved with the confidence of someone who had finally secured her place in this ancient institution, no longer the controversial figure who had once faced her own media persecution. Time had granted her a certain invulnerability, but it had also, Charles noticed with growing concern, hardened something within her. Still brooding over the Middleton girl, Camilla's voice carried a note of disdain as she gestured toward the newspapers. Really, darling, I don't understand why you're so invested in this. The press will move on eventually. They always do. Charles looked up at his wife, studying her face carefully. There was something in her expression that troubled him, a satisfaction that seemed almost cruel. These attacks are coordinated, Camilla. This isn't just random media interest. Someone is feeding them information, encouraging this narrative that Kate isn't good enough for William. Camilla settled into the leather armchair across from his desk, her movements deliberately casual. Perhaps because it's true? The girl comes from trade, Charles. Her mother was an air hostess, for heaven's sake. Her parents run a party supply business. Is it really so unreasonable to question whether she understands what royal life entails? The coldness in his wife's voice made Charles set down his reading glasses and look at her more intently. Her background is hardly relevant. What matters is her character, her devotion to William, and her willingness to serve. Those qualities aren't determined by birth. How refreshingly modern of you, Camilla replied, but her tone suggested anything but admiration. Though I wonder if your son shares that sentiment when the novelty wears off, and he realizes what he's committed himself to. Charles felt a flash of anger at the calculated cruelty of her words, but before he could respond, his private secretary knocked and entered. The young man's face was grave as he approached the desk with another stack of papers. Your Royal Highness, I'm afraid there's been another development, the secretary said, glancing nervously between Charles and Camilla. The Sun is preparing to run a story tomorrow claiming that Miss Middleton's university thesis was actually written by a paid service. They say they have documentation proving academic fraud. The blood drained from Charles's face as he processed this information. If such a story ran, regardless of its truth, it would be devastating to Kate's reputation. Universities took academic integrity seriously, and any suggestion of cheating would follow her for the rest of her life. That's preposterous, Charles said, standing abruptly. Kate graduated with honors from St. Andrews. William has spoken extensively about her intelligence and academic achievements. This is clearly fabricated. Camilla leaned forward with interest. How can you be so certain? Young people from her background often feel pressure to succeed beyond their natural abilities. Perhaps she simply made a mistake in judgment. Charles turned to stare at his wife, shocked by her willingness to entertain such a damaging accusation. Are you seriously suggesting that Kate would risk her entire future by cheating on her thesis? The woman who has conducted herself with nothing but dignity despite months of harassment. I'm simply saying we shouldn't dismiss possibilities simply because they're uncomfortable, Camilla replied smoothly. The royal family has weathered many scandals by facing facts honestly rather than defending the indefensible. Something in her tone triggered a memory that had been nagging at Charles for weeks. The timing of these attacks on Kate seemed too convenient, too well orchestrated. Someone with inside knowledge of the royal family's concerns was clearly guiding the media narrative. The stories always seemed to hit on exactly the points that would cause maximum damage to Kate's reputation and, by extension, William's happiness. Charles dismissed his secretary with a curt nod and waited until they were alone again before speaking. Camilla, I need to ask you something directly, and I need an honest answer. Do you know anything about these coordinated attacks on Kate? The question hung in the air between them like a challenge. Camilla's face remained perfectly composed, but Charles caught a slight tightening around her eyes that he recognized from years of observing her navigating difficult situations. What a strange question, she said finally. What possible involvement could I have in media coverage? I'm hardly running around London speaking to journalists. That's not what I asked, Charles pressed, his voice growing firmer. You have contacts throughout the establishment. Old friends from your previous life, people who understand how to shape public opinion. It would be relatively simple to plant stories, to suggest angles that might damage Kate's reputation. Camilla stood gracefully, smoothing down her dressing gown with hands that remained perfectly steady. Charles, I think the stress of this situation is making you paranoid. I understand you feel protective of your future daughter-in-law, but accusing me of orchestrating some conspiracy is rather dramatic, don't you think? But Charles was remembering other conversations now, seemingly innocent comments Camilla had made over the past months. Her observations about Kate's family being climbers, her suggestions that William might be better suited to someone with a more traditional background, her frequent reminders of how difficult royal life could be for outsiders. At the time, he had dismissed these as natural concerns about William's future happiness. Now they seemed like something more calculated. You never answered my question, he said quietly. Do you know anything about these attacks? Camilla's composure finally cracked slightly, and Charles saw a flash of something hard and defensive in her eyes. What if I do? She said, her voice rising. What if I've simply shared my honest concerns with a few trusted friends? Is it wrong to want what's best for William? For the monarchy? The admission hit Charles like a physical blow. He had suspected, but hearing her confirm his fears was devastating in a way he hadn't anticipated. You've been deliberately undermining Kate, feeding her enemies information they could use against her. I've been protecting this family, Camilla shot back, her voice now openly hostile. That girl has no idea what she's getting herself into. She thinks royal life is all garden parties and tiaras. When the reality hits her, when she realizes the sacrifices required, she'll run just like Diana did. Better to end this now before it destroys William completely. The comparison to Diana was like salt in an old wound, and Charles felt his anger flare beyond his ability to control it. How dare you invoke Diana's name to justify this campaign of cruelty? Kate is nothing like Diana. She's steady, grounded, devoted to William. The only thing threatening their happiness is this orchestrated attack on her character. You're being naive, Camilla said, moving closer to his desk. Look at her breeding, Charles. Look at her family. Her mother pushes herself into every social situation, desperate to climb higher. Her father hides behind his wife's ambition. Kate herself has done nothing but shop and wait for William to propose for years. What exactly qualifies her to be a future queen? Charles slammed his hand down on the desk, scattering the newspaper clippings. What qualified you, Camilla? What qualifies any of us? We're born into this role, or we marry into it. The only real qualification is character, and Kate has shown more grace under pressure than most people manage in a lifetime. For a moment, Camilla looked genuinely shocked by his vehemence. Then, her face hardened into something Charles had never seen before, a cold calculation that made him wonder how well he really knew the woman he had married. Fine, she said, her voice deadly quiet. Defend your precious Kate. But when she fails, when she proves inadequate to the role, remember this conversation. Remember that I tried to prevent a disaster that will reflect on all of us. She turned toward the door, but Charles's voice stopped her. This ends now, Camilla. Whatever contacts you've been using, whatever stories you've been planting, it stops today. I won't allow you to destroy an innocent young woman to satisfy your own prejudices. Camilla turned back with a smile that was more threatening than any shout could have been. You think you can control this now? The machine is already in motion, Charles. The stories are written, the source is established. Even if I wanted to stop it, which I don't, it's beyond my power now. As she left the study, Charles sank into his chair, feeling suddenly exhausted. Through the window, he could see Kate returning from her walk, her pace slow and dejected. She had no idea that the woman she was trying to win over, the woman whose approval she sought as William's stepmother, was the architect of her torment. Charles picked up his secure telephone and dialed William's number. His son deserved to know what they were really facing, and Kate deserved protection from attacks that were far more personal and calculated than either of them realized. The conversation ahead would be difficult, but Charles knew that defending Kate meant confronting the darkness that had somehow taken root in his own household. As he waited for William to answer, Charles watched Kate pause by the fountain in the center of the garden. Even from this distance, he could see her wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. The sight strengthened his resolve. Whatever it cost him personally, whatever damage it might do to his marriage, he would not allow Camilla's cruelty to continue unchallenged. The young woman in the garden deserved better than this, and Charles was determined to ensure she received it. The battle lines had been drawn in his own home, and for the first time in his relationship with Camilla, Charles knew exactly which side he was on. The afternoon rain drummed against the windows of Kensington Palace as William paced the length of his private apartment, his phone pressed tightly against his ear. Charles could hear the anguish in his son's voice even through the crackling connection, and it confirmed every fear that had been building in his mind since that morning's confrontation with Camilla. "Father, they're destroying her," William said, his voice breaking with emotion. Kate came home from lunch with friends yesterday in tears. Apparently, someone had planted photographers outside the restaurant, and they followed her to 3 different shops, taking pictures of everything she looked at, everything she bought. The headlines today are calling her a shopping obsessive and questioning whether she's financially responsible enough to represent the crown. Charles closed his eyes, feeling the weight of his own complicity in his son's pain. He should have seen Camilla's campaign earlier, should have recognized the signs, and stopped it before it reached this level of cruelty. "William, I need to tell you something about these attacks. They're not random media interest. They're being orchestrated from within our own circle." The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long that Charles wondered if the connection had been lost. Finally, William spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "What do you mean, from within our own circle?" Charles took a deep breath, knowing that what he was about to reveal would change his son's relationship with his stepmother forever. "I confronted Camilla this morning. She admitted to sharing information with media contacts, to deliberately undermining Kate's reputation. She believes Kate isn't suitable for royal life and has been working to end your relationship." The explosion of rage that followed was unlike anything Charles had ever heard from his normally composed eldest son. William's voice rose to a roar that seemed to echo through the phone. "She what? Camilla has been deliberately attacking Kate? The woman who's supposed to be welcoming her into our family has been trying to destroy her." "I'm afraid so," Charles said quietly. "And I fear it's worse than we know. She claimed the campaign is beyond her control now, that she set something in motion that can't be stopped." The sound of something crashing came through the phone, followed by William's harsh breathing. Charles could picture his son in his sitting room, probably having swept something off his desk in his fury. He had inherited the Windsor temper, usually kept carefully in check, but when it broke through, it was formidable. "How could you let this happen?" William demanded. "How could you be married to someone who would do this to Kate, to me, to our family? This is unconscionable, Father. Kate has done nothing but try to prove herself worthy of this life, and your wife has been sabotaging her every step of the way." Charles felt the full weight of his son's accusation, and he knew it was deserved. "You're right to be angry with me, William. I should have seen the signs earlier, should have protected Kate better. But I'm telling you now because I intend to make this right. Whatever it takes. Make it right." William's voice was bitter with disbelief. "How do you make right months of character assassination? How do you undo the damage to Kate's reputation, to her family's reputation? Do you know that her parents are being harassed at their business? That photographers camp outside their house in Bucklebury? That Kate's younger sister Pippa is being followed to work and photographed in compromising situations?" Each detail hit Charles like a physical blow. He had been so focused on the attacks on Kate herself that he hadn't fully grasped how the campaign was affecting her entire family. The Middletons were private citizens who had never sought public attention, yet they were being treated like fair game by media outlets fed information from someone who should have been protecting them. "I didn't know about her family being targeted," Charles admitted. "That's completely unacceptable. I'll speak to my press secretary immediately about issuing protective guidelines." "Your press secretary?" William's voice rose again. "Father, your wife has been feeding these same press contacts for months. What makes you think anything you say now will stop them? They smell blood in the water, and They won't stop until they've destroyed Kate completely. Through the window of his study, Charles could see the gardens where Kate had walked that morning, looking so defeated and alone. The image strengthened his resolve to take more dramatic action than simply talking to staff members. Then, we'll have to take stronger measures, Charles said firmly. I'm going to contact the editors personally, make it clear that any publication continuing this campaign against Kate will face consequences. The royal family has more influence than Camilla realizes, and it's time to use it. And what about Camilla? William's voice was ice-cold now. What consequences will she face for orchestrating this attack on the woman I love? Charles was quiet for a long moment, grappling with the personal cost of what needed to happen next. His marriage to Camilla had been hard-won, fought for through years of public scandal and family opposition. To confront her publicly, to essentially choose Kate over his own wife, would have consequences that would reverberate through the rest of his life. I don't know yet, he admitted. But she will face consequences, William. I promise you that. She needs to know that her actions have destroyed any relationship she might have had with Kate, William said, his voice growing steadier as his anger crystallized into determination. Kate will never trust her, never feel safe around her. Camilla has made herself an enemy of your future daughter-in-law, and, by extension, an enemy of your future king. The formal way William phrased that last statement sent a chill through Charles. His son was reminding him that this wasn't just a family squabble. It was a conflict that would affect the monarchy itself. When William became king, Camilla would find herself dealing with a sovereign who knew she had tried to destroy his wife. The implications were staggering. William, I understand your anger, but we need to be careful about how we handle this going forward. The family cannot afford to be seen as divided, especially not over something like this. The family is already divided, father, William replied coldly. Camilla divided at the moment she decided Kate wasn't good enough for us. You can't have it both ways. You can't protect your wife and protect Kate at the same time. You're going to have to choose. After ending the call, Charles sat in his study as the afternoon light faded, contemplating the impossible position his wife had placed him in. Through careful manipulation and calculated cruelty, Camilla had forced him to choose between his marriage and his son's happiness. It was, he realized, perhaps the most selfish thing anyone had ever done to him. The door opened, and his private secretary entered, carrying an urgent message that made Charles's blood run cold. The Sun had moved up their timeline and was planning to run the fabricated story about Kate's thesis in tomorrow morning's edition. Worse, they had somehow obtained what they claimed were internal palace communications expressing doubt about Kate's suitability. Charles stared at the message, recognizing Camilla's handiwork. She wasn't content to let the campaign run its natural course. She was escalating it, using whatever contacts and information she had to deliver what she hoped would be a killing blow to Kate's reputation. He picked up his phone and dialed the private number of the Sun's editor, a man who owed the royal family several favors accumulated over years of exclusive access. The conversation that followed was tense, but ultimately productive. Charles made it clear that any publication running fabricated stories about Kate would lose all future cooperation from the royal household. More importantly, he promised a carefully orchestrated campaign of legal action that would make the phone hacking scandal look like a minor inconvenience. But even as Charles worked to kill the immediate story, he knew Camilla was right about one thing. The machine she had set in motion would be difficult to stop completely. Too many media outlets had been fed information, too many stories were already written and waiting for publication. Stopping the campaign would require more than phone calls to editors. It would require exposing Camilla's role publicly, turning her from the architect of Kate's destruction into a cautionary tale about the price of cruelty within the royal family. Charles realized that defending Kate fully would mean destroying his wife's reputation as thoroughly as Camilla had tried to destroy Kate's. As he sat in the growing darkness of his study, Charles made a decision that would have seemed impossible just hours earlier. He would protect Kate, whatever the cost to his own marriage. William was right. He couldn't have it both ways. The young woman who had shown such grace under undeserved pressure deserved his loyalty more than the wife who had betrayed everything the royal family was supposed to represent. The battle for Kate's reputation was about to become a war, and Charles was finally ready to choose his side decisively. Camilla had pushed him into an impossible position, but she had underestimated one crucial factor: Charles's fundamental sense of justice and his protective instincts toward those who couldn't protect themselves. Tomorrow, he would begin the careful process of destroying the machine Camilla had built, even if it meant destroying his marriage in the process. Kate Middleton deserved nothing less than his complete protection, and she was finally going to receive it. The emergency meeting convened at 6 o'clock the following morning in Charles's private study was unlike any the senior royal household staff had ever attended. Present were his private secretary, press secretary, legal counsel, and security chief, for individuals who had served the royal family with absolute discretion for decades. The gravity on Charles's face as he addressed them made clear this was not a routine damage control exercise. What I'm about to tell you cannot leave this room unless I specifically authorize its disclosure, Charles began, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. We have discovered that the coordinated media campaign against Miss Catherine Middleton has been orchestrated from within this household. The person responsible has been feeding information to hostile media outlets for months, with the specific intent of ending Prince William's relationship. The shocked silence that followed was broken by his press secretary, a seasoned professional who had navigated countless royal crises. Sir, if this is true, we're looking at a scandal that could severely damage the monarchy's credibility. The public trusts us to protect those who come into our circle, not destroy them. Charles nodded grimly. Which is why we're going to handle this with absolute precision. I want every contact Miss Middleton has had with the press traced. I want to know which outlets received information, what that information was, and how it was transmitted. Most importantly, I want documented proof of the source. His legal counsel leaned forward, understanding the implications immediately. Sir, if you're planning to take action against a member of the royal family, we'll need ironclad evidence. Accusations of this nature could split the family publicly if not handled with extreme care. The family is already split, Charles replied coldly. The question now is whether we're going to allow an innocent young woman to be destroyed to protect someone who has betrayed every principle we claim to uphold. As his staff began the delicate work of tracing the information trail, Charles turned his attention to a more immediate problem. Kate herself was scheduled to attend a charity function that evening, her first public appearance since the latest wave of attacks. Charles knew that Camilla would also be present, and the thought of his wife's satisfied smile as she watched Kate struggle through the event filled him with rage. He picked up his private phone and dialed Kate's number directly, bypassing the usual protocol that would have routed the call through various intermediaries. When Kate answered, her voice was subdued but polite, carrying the careful modulation of someone who had learned to expect bad news. "Catherine, it's Charles," he said, deliberately using her full name to signal the formality of the conversation. "I need to speak with you privately before tonight's event. Could you come to Clarence's house this afternoon?" There was a pause before Kate responded, and Charles could hear the wariness in her voice. "Of course, sir. Is there something specific you need to discuss? If this is about the recent press coverage, I want you to know that I'm handling it as best I can." The resignation in her voice broke Charles's heart. This young woman, who should have been celebrating her engagement and planning her future as William's wife, had instead been worn down by months of calculated cruelty. "Catherine, what I need to discuss is better handled in person. I'll see you at 3 o'clock. When Kate arrived that afternoon, Charles was struck by how much the constant stress had aged her. She was still beautiful, still poised, but there was a fragility about her that hadn't been there 6 months earlier. She moved carefully, as if expecting another blow to fall at any moment. "Thank you for coming," Charles said, gesturing for her to sit in the comfortable chair facing his desk. "I know this has been an incredibly difficult time for you, and I want you to know how much I admire the grace you've shown throughout this ordeal." Kate's composure wavered slightly at his kindness. "I appreciate that, sir. I've been trying to prove that I can handle royal life, that I won't be a liability to William or the family. I know there are concerns about my background, and I'm working to address them." Charles felt his anger at Camilla flare again as he saw how thoroughly her campaign had succeeded in making Kate doubt herself. "Catherine, I need you to understand something very clearly. You have nothing to prove to anyone in this family. Your background is not a liability, it's an asset. The monarchy needs people who understand what life is like for ordinary citizens." Confusion flickered across Kate's face at his vehement defense. "But the press coverage suggests that many people close to the royal family have concerns about my suitability. I've been trying to understand what I've done wrong, how I can improve." "You've done nothing wrong," Charles said firmly. "And the concerns you're referring to don't come from many people. They come from one person who has been deliberately undermining you for her own purposes." Charles watched as the implications of his words sank in. Kate's face went very still, and He could see her quick intelligence working to understand what he was telling her. "Someone in the royal family has been working against me?" she asked quietly. "Someone with access to private information and media contacts?" Charles nodded, knowing that Kate was smart enough to narrow down the possibilities quickly. There were only a few people with both the access and motivation to orchestrate such a campaign. "I discovered the truth yesterday, and I want you to know that it ends now. The attacks on you and your family will stop." Kate was silent for a long moment, processing this revelation. When she spoke again, her voice was steadier, as if finally, understanding her enemy had given her strength rather than despair. "It's Camilla, isn't it?" Kate said, meeting Charles's eyes directly. "She's been feeding information to the press, encouraging them to attack my character and my family's background." Charles appreciated that Kate had the courage to name his wife directly rather than dancing around the truth. "Yes, I confronted her yesterday, and she admitted to sharing her concerns with media contacts. She believes you're unsuitable for William and has been working to end your relationship." The transformation in Kate was immediate and striking. The fragility that had marked her appearance melted away, replaced by something harder and more determined. Charles realized he was seeing the steel that lay beneath her gentle exterior, the strength that would serve her well as William's wife and eventually as queen. "How long has this been going on?" Kate asked, her voice now carrying an edge that reminded Charles powerfully of his late mother's tone when she was angry. "Months," Charles admitted. "Probably since your relationship with William became serious. She's been systematic about it, targeting every aspect of your life that she thought might be vulnerable to attack." Kate stood and walked to the window, looking out at the garden where Charles had watched her walk in defeat just yesterday. When she turned back, her expression was composed but implacable. "I need to know exactly what she's done," Kate said. "Every story she's planted, every contact she's used, every piece of information she's shared. If I'm going to be part of this family, I need to understand what I'm dealing with." Charles was impressed by her response. Rather than collapsing under the weight of this betrayal, Kate was treating it as intelligence she needed to protect herself and her future. She was already thinking like a royal, understanding that knowledge of her enemies was essential for survival. "My staff is compiling that information now," Charles said. "But, Catherine, I want you to know that you won't have to deal with this alone. I failed to protect you initially, but that changes now. You have my complete support." Kate studied his face carefully, and Charles could see her evaluating his sincerity and the practical weight of his promise. "What about tonight's charity function? Camilla will be there, and I'm expected to attend as well." Charles had been dreading this question, knowing that Kate's first public appearance since learning the truth would be a crucial test of her composure and his protection. "I'll be there as well, and I'll make sure you're not left vulnerable to any further attacks. But, Catherine, I need to know, are you strong enough for this? Because once we start fighting back openly, this becomes a very different kind of war." Kate's smile was sharp and confident, nothing like the uncertain expression she had worn for months. "Sir, your wife has spent months trying to destroy me using lies and manipulation. She's attacked my family, my education, my character, and my worthiness to marry the man I love. I think I've proven I'm strong enough to handle whatever comes next." As Kate left Clarence's house that afternoon, Charles felt something he hadn't experienced in months: hope. The young woman who had seemed so fragile that morning had revealed herself to be formidable when she understood her true situation. Camilla had underestimated Kate's resilience, just as she had underestimated Charles's willingness to protect those he considered part of his family. That evening's charity function would be the first public appearance of this new dynamic, and Charles found himself looking forward to seeing Camilla's reaction when she realized that her carefully constructed campaign had not only failed but had created a far more dangerous enemy than she had anticipated. Kate Middleton, armed with the truth and backed by Charles's authority, was about to prove exactly why she would make a formidable future queen. The Royal Opera House glittered with understated elegance as London's social elite gathered for the annual Children's Hospital Charity Gala. Charles arrived precisely on time, his practiced eye immediately scanning the crowd for both Kate and Camilla. This evening would be the first time the three of them had been in the same room since his discovery of his wife's betrayal, and the tension in the air was almost palpable to those who knew what to look for. Camilla appeared first, descending the grand staircase with the confidence of someone who believed she still held all the cards. She wore a stunning emerald gown that caught the light beautifully, and her smile was radiant as she greeted the other guests. To the casual observer, She was the picture of royal grace. But Charles, watching her carefully, could see the calculating way she positioned herself to have clear sight lines to the entrance, waiting for Kate's arrival like a predator anticipating wounded prey. When Kate finally appeared, the transformation from their afternoon meeting was stunning. Gone was any trace of the uncertain young woman who had endured months of attacks. Instead, Kate moved through the crowd with quiet authority, her navy blue gown elegant without being ostentatious, her smile warm but controlled. Most importantly, Charles noticed, she seemed completely unintimidated by the setting or the scrutiny she knew she would face. Charles positioned himself strategically near the reception area, wanting to observe the first interaction between the two women now that the truth was out in the open. He didn't have to wait long. As Kate approached the receiving line where Camilla was greeting guests, the older woman's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. Where she had expected to see defeat and humiliation, she instead encountered a composed young woman who met her eyes directly and without flinching. "Catherine, how lovely to see you," Camilla said, her voice carrying its usual warmth but with an undertone that only someone listening carefully would catch. "You look well, considering everything that's been happening in the press lately." Kate's response was a masterclass in controlled communication. "Thank you, Camilla. I've been learning so much about how the royal family operates, about the various forces that shape public perception. It's been quite educational." Charles watched Camilla's face carefully and saw the moment she realized that Kate's words carried a deeper meaning. The younger woman wasn't making small talk. She was sending a message that she understood exactly what had been happening to her and who was responsible for it. "Education is so important," Camilla replied, her smile becoming more forced. "Especially understanding one's place in the larger scheme of things. Not everyone is naturally suited to royal life, after all." "You're absolutely right," Kate said, her voice remaining pleasant even as her words carried steel. "Some people reveal their true character when they're given power over others. It's fascinating to see how they choose to use that power, whether to build others up or tear them down." The conversation was being conducted in the polite language of royal society, but Charles could see that both women understood they were engaged in something much more serious. Camilla was testing whether Kate would continue to be passive in the face of attack, while Kate was making it clear that those days were over. Other guests began to notice the tension between the two women, though they couldn't understand its source. Charles saw several influential society figures exchange meaningful glances as they observed the careful verbal sparring. In royal circles, such exchanges were analyzed and discussed for weeks afterward, and Charles knew that word of this confrontation would spread quickly through the appropriate channels. As the evening progressed, Charles made a point of staying close to Kate, making his support visible to everyone present. When photographers approached, he positioned himself to ensure that any pictures would show him clearly allied with William's girlfriend rather than maintaining neutral ground. It was a subtle but unmistakable signal to those who understood royal protocol. The most telling moment came during the charity auction, when a week-long stay at a private estate in Scotland was being offered. Camilla made a show of bidding enthusiastically, drawing attention to her generous support of the charity. But when Kate quietly entered the bidding and ultimately won the lot with a bid that represented a significant financial commitment, the symbolism was clear to everyone watching. Charles knew that Kate's family, while successful in their business, were not wealthy by the standards of this crowd. Her willingness to make such a substantial donation was a statement that she belonged in this world and was willing to meet its obligations. More importantly, it demonstrated that she would not be cowed by Camilla's attempts to position her as an outsider looking in. Camilla's reaction to being outbid was subtle but unmistakable to Charles, who knew her expressions intimately. Her smile remained fixed, but her knuckles whitened as she gripped her champagne glass more tightly. She had expected Kate to remain in the background, perhaps making a token bid to show willing but ultimately deferring to her social superiors. Instead, Kate had claimed space in the most public way possible. As the auction concluded and guests moved toward the dining room, Charles found himself walking between Kate and Camilla, a position that felt increasingly symbolic of the choice he was being forced to make. The conversation at their table was polite but strained, with various charitable board members attempting to maintain normal social discourse while sensing the undercurrent of tension between the two royal women. It was during the main course that Camilla made her most serious miscalculation of the evening. Perhaps frustrated by Kate's refusal to be intimidated, or maybe simply unable to resist the opportunity to strike at what she perceived as vulnerability, Camilla turned the conversation toward family backgrounds and the importance of understanding one's heritage. It's so crucial for young people to appreciate where they come from, Camilla said, her voice carrying to several nearby tables. Some families have been serving their country for generations, while others are just beginning to understand what service really means. The adjustment can be quite overwhelming for those without the proper preparation. The comment was clearly designed to highlight Kate's relative newcomer status and suggest that her family lacked the breeding necessary for royal life. In the old dynamic, Kate might have flushed and remained silent, allowing the insult to land unchallenged. But the woman who responded was no longer willing to accept such treatment. "You're absolutely right about the importance of service," Kate replied, her voice carrying clearly across the nearby tables. "My family has taught me that true service means using whatever advantages you have to help others, not to hurt them. We believe that character matters more than circumstances of birth, and that protecting those who can't protect themselves is one of the highest callings anyone can have." The response was perfect in its apparent agreement while simultaneously delivering a devastating counterattack. Kate had managed to suggest that her family's values were actually superior to those being demonstrated by someone who would use their position to harm others. The nearby guests were clearly impressed by Kate's composure and the intelligence of her response. Charles watched Camilla's face flush slightly as she realized she had been outmaneuvered publicly. Worse for her, Kate's response had been delivered with such grace and apparent sincerity that no one could accuse her of being rude or inappropriate. She had simply stated her family's values in a way that highlighted Camilla's moral failure without directly naming it. The remainder of the evening passed without further direct confrontation, but Charles could see that something fundamental had shifted. Kate moved through the crowd with increasing confidence, engaging warmly with other guests, and showing no sign of the intimidation that had marked her previous public appearances. Meanwhile, Camilla seemed increasingly isolated, her usual circle of supporters apparently uncertain about how to navigate this new dynamic. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Charles found himself alone with Camilla for the first time since their confrontation. She was standing by the window overlooking the street, watching as Kate's car pulled away from the curb. "She's not the frightened little girl you thought she was, is she?" Charles said quietly. Camilla turned to face him, and for the first time in years, he saw genuine uncertainty in her eyes. "I underestimated her intelligence," she admitted. "But, Charles, this doesn't change anything. She's still not suitable for William, still not prepared for what royal life really demands." Charles studied his wife's face, looking for any sign of remorse or recognition of the harm she had caused. Finding none, he made his final decision about how to handle the crisis she had created. "Camilla," he said, his voice carrying the authority of his position and the finality of someone who had run out of patience. "Tomorrow morning, you will contact every media outlet and source you've been feeding information to, and you will make it clear that your campaign against Catherine ends immediately. Furthermore, you will issue a statement expressing your support for her relationship with William and your excitement about welcoming her into the family." Camilla's face went white with shock and anger. "You can't be serious. You're asking me to humiliate myself publicly, to admit that I've been working against her." "I'm not asking," Charles replied coldly. "I'm telling you. Because if you don't make this right voluntarily, I will release the documentation my staff has compiled about your activities. The story of a jealous stepmother trying to destroy her stepson's relationship will make headlines around the world, and your reputation will never recover." The threat hung between them like a sword, and Charles could see Camilla calculating whether he was serious. After a moment, her expression hardened into something ugly and desperate. "You would destroy your own wife to protect that girl?" she demanded. "You destroyed yourself," Charles replied. "I'm simply ensuring that an innocent young woman doesn't pay the price for your cruelty. Kate Middleton will be part of this family, Camilla, with or without your approval. The only question now is whether you'll be part of it too." The morning sun cast long shadows across Clarence's house as Charles sat in his study, reading the statement that would either end the crisis or escalate it beyond all control. His legal team had worked through the night to craft words that would simultaneously protect Kate, minimize damage to the monarchy, and give Camilla one final chance to salvage her position within the royal family. The document on his desk was elegant in its simplicity, a brief statement expressing Camilla's wholehearted support for William's relationship with Kate and her excitement about welcoming a new daughter into the family. To the public, it would seem like a standard royal endorsement. To those who understood the context, it would represent Camilla's complete capitulation and public admission that her previous position had been wrong. Charles had given his wife until 9 o'clock that morning to sign the statement voluntarily. It was now 8:45, and she had not appeared. Through the window, he could see his security detail maintaining their usual positions, but there was a tension in their bearing that suggested they too understood something significant was happening within the household. At precisely 8:58, the study door burst open without ceremony. Camilla strode in wearing a silk robe, her hair disheveled, and her face flushed with rage. In her hand, she clutched the draft statement, and Charles could see that she had been crying. Whether from anger or desperation, he couldn't tell. "How dare you?" she screamed, throwing the papers onto his desk with such force that they scattered across the polished surface. "How dare you try to force me to humiliate myself publicly for that calculating little social climber? I've given you everything, Charles. I waited years while you wallowed in guilt over Diana. I endured public hatred and ridicule to be with you. And this is how you repay my loyalty." Charles remained seated, his voice calm and controlled in stark contrast to his wife's hysteria. "Your loyalty? Camilla, you've spent months systematically destroying an innocent young woman because she didn't meet your standards of breeding. That's not loyalty to me or to the family. That's pure selfishness. She doesn't belong here," Camilla shouted, her composure completely shattered. "Look at her background, Charles. Look at her family. Her mother was a flight attendant who married a man whose family ran a small business. They're middle-class social climbers who see Kate's relationship with William as their ticket to elevated status. Can't you see what's happening?" Charles stood slowly, his movement deliberate and threatening in its control. "What I see is a woman so consumed with her own insecurities that she's willing to destroy someone else to feel secure in her position. Kate's parents built a successful business through hard work and talent. They've raised a daughter who has shown nothing but grace under pressure. The only person in this situation who has revealed poor character is you." Camilla's face twisted with an ugly combination of rage and desperation. "You think you know her so well? You think she's this perfect innocent victim? Charles, she's been playing a long game from the moment she met William. Every action, every appearance, every word has been calculated to appear worthy. She's manipulated you just as thoroughly as she's manipulated him." The accusation was so far from Charles's assessment of Kate's character that it only served to highlight how distorted Camilla's perspective had become. Even if that were true, which it isn't, it would hardly justify your campaign against her. "But we're not here to debate Kate's character, Camilla. We're here to discuss yours, and what you're going to do to repair the damage you've caused." Camilla moved closer to his desk, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "And if I refuse? If I won't sign your ridiculous statement and grovel publicly to a woman I consider unsuitable for this family? What then, Charles? Will you divorce me? Will you choose that girl over your own wife?" The question hung in the air between them, and Charles realized that this was the heart of the crisis Camilla had created. By attacking Kate so systematically, she had forced him into exactly the kind of impossible choice he had spent his entire adult life trying to avoid. But, unlike the situations he had faced in his youth, this time the moral clarity was absolute. "If necessary, yes," Charles said quietly. "If protecting an innocent young woman from your cruelty means ending our marriage, then that's a price I'm willing to pay. You've shown me a side of yourself that I didn't know existed, Camilla, and I don't like what I see." The admission hit Camilla like a physical blow. She staggered backward, her hand gripping the edge of a chair for support. "You would throw away everything we've built together for someone who's been in your life for a few years. You threw away everything we built together the moment you decided to destroy Kate," Charles replied. "I didn't make this choice, Camilla. You made it for me when you started your campaign of hatred. Every lie you told, every story you planted, every attempt to damage her reputation was a choice to prioritize your own prejudices over our marriage and the values this family is supposed to represent." Camilla's face crumpled, and, for a moment, Charles saw a glimpse of the vulnerable woman he had fallen in love with decades earlier. "She's going to take everything away from me," Camilla whispered. "My position, my influence, my relationship with you. Can't you see that she's already succeeding?" Charles felt a pang of sympathy for his wife's obvious pain, but it wasn't enough to change his fundamental assessment of the situation. "Kate isn't taking anything away from you, Camilla. She never had that power. But you've thrown it all away through your own actions. The young woman you've been trying to destroy would have been happy to have a good relationship with you. She wanted your approval, your guidance, your mentorship. Instead, you saw her as a threat and treated her as an enemy. The truth of that statement seemed to penetrate Camilla's desperation, and Charles could see her beginning to understand the full scope of her miscalculation. She had created an enemy where none had needed to exist, and in doing so, she had also created the very situation she had been trying to prevent. Kate now had more influence with Charles than Camilla herself did. It's not too late, Charles continued, his voice gentler now, but still firm. If you sign this statement and genuinely commit to supporting Kate, you can still salvage your position in this family. But if you continue down this path, you'll lose everything you claim to value. The choice is entirely yours. Camilla looked at the scattered papers on his desk, then back at his face, searching for any sign of uncertainty or willingness to compromise. Finding none, she seemed to deflate completely, the fight going out of her as she realized the full weight of her situation. "And if I sign it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What guarantee do I have that Kate will forgive me? That she won't use her influence with you and William to marginalize me in this family?" Charles considered the question carefully, knowing that his answer would determine whether his marriage could survive this crisis. "Kate isn't vindictive, Camilla. She's shown remarkable grace throughout this ordeal, and I believe she would be willing to move forward if you demonstrated genuine remorse. But that would require you to actually change your attitude toward her, not just issue a public statement." Camilla was quiet for a long moment, and Charles could see her weighing her options. Finally, she moved to his desk and picked up one of the scattered pages. "If I sign this, I want your word that you'll never throw this crisis in my face again. I want to know that we can move past this if I make amends." "You have my word," Charles said solemnly. "But, Camilla, this can never happen again. If I discover that you've taken any action against Kate or any other member of this family in the future, there won't be warnings or ultimatums. There will simply be consequences." Camilla nodded slowly, then reached for the pen on his desk. As she signed her name to the statement, Charles could see tears streaming down her face. Whether they were tears of remorse, humiliation, or simple defeat, he couldn't tell. But as she set down the pen and looked up at him, he saw something in her eyes that gave him hope that their marriage might survive this crisis. "I'll call my press contacts this morning," she said quietly. "I'll make sure they understand that any further attacks on Kate will not be welcomed. And, Charles, I'll try to do better. I can't promise that I'll ever think she's perfect for this life, but I can promise that I won't work against her anymore." Charles nodded, accepting her commitment while understanding that rebuilding trust would take time. "That's all I can ask for, Camilla. And perhaps, if you give her a chance, you might discover that Kate is stronger and more capable than you've given her credit for." As Camilla left the study to make her phone calls, Charles picked up the signed statement and felt a sense of relief that the immediate crisis was over. But he also knew that the real work was just beginning. Kate would need to be told about Camilla's capitulation. William would need to be reassured that the threat to his relationship had ended, and the delicate work of rebuilding family relationships would require patience and wisdom from all involved. Most importantly, Charles had learned something crucial about himself and his values during this crisis. When forced to choose between protecting his marriage and protecting an innocent person from cruelty, he had discovered that his moral compass still pointed toward justice, even when the personal cost was potentially devastating. The young woman who had shown such dignity throughout months of undeserved attacks had earned more than his protection. She had earned his respect and admiration. Kate Middleton would make a formidable future queen, and Charles was proud that he had finally chosen to stand firmly on her side when it mattered most. The silence that had followed Camilla's screams was not the silence of defeat, but the silence of resolution. The battle for Kate's place in the royal family was over, and she had won not through manipulation or scheming, but through the simple power of maintaining her dignity while others revealed their true character through their actions. In defending Kate, Charles had also defended the values that the monarchy was supposed to represent. Justice had prevailed, even if it had taken longer than it should have, and the royal family would emerge from this crisis stronger and more unified than before.